Hello, my name is John Brink, and you're watching A History of the BC Forest Industry. Hi, thank you for joining us today. My guest today is an extremely interesting guest. A fellow that I've known for a long time, actually. He is from Sweden, and he speaks to us from Sunswell in Sweden. And his name is Jan Hedberg, and he is, I would suggest, to be an expert in the field of forest industry in Sweden, but also has a much broader knowledge of the forest industry and even in North America. So, Jan, welcome to our show.
Thank you, John. Nice to see you and talk with you again.
Yes. Now, for our guest, that will be watching, you are in Sunswell in Sweden today.
Yes, today I'm in Sunswell, and it's about close to middle part of Sweden. Sweden is very long, from north to south.
And it's on the east coast of Sweden.
Yes, it's close to the Baltic Sea.
Yeah. Now, Sweden, as you know, I have spent some time there, especially in the late 50s and early 60s when I was involved in the forest industry and was still a young fella. I had the privilege of spending some time in Sweden, and we used to buy lumber in Sweden, especially from Sunswell, loaded into boats, we called it coasters, that then floated to Holland, and it was then unloaded there. So that was the industry way back then. And, for yourself, you were born in Sweden, but you were not born in Sunswell. You were born in a place called Copper Mountain.
Yes, it's about 5 hours from here driving west of Stockholm. And yes, it has been a lot of trading connections to Netherlands. I think it started in the 1600s actually, so it's a long tradition. And here in Sunswell is actually the place where the sawmilling started in bigger perspective. 1849 was the first steam-powered sawmill, and it started to go into commercial sawmilling.
So 1849, I'm going to have to think about, is that 180 years ago or something?
Yes, 171 year.
Yeah, so it kind of puts into perspective, the history of the Swedish forest industry compared to not only Canada, but to North America. This is a long established industry.
Yes, we started early. The demand for logs and lumber came from Europe after they had used their forest in England and Germany. The demand came to the southern part of Sweden and southern Norway, and it was like a wave that came up through Sweden, and you can see the long rivers. You can have the dates when they started to cut trees for the industry.
Now, talking about you a little bit more, you were born in Copper Mountain, and then you had your schooling in Copper Mountain area?
Yes, exactly. And I went up to military service in northern part of Sweden, not so far from Sunswell. And after some years in ambulance service, and I came into forestry and educated to forest engineer and biology.
And so, but, like I have, as you already know, because we've known each other for a long time, and we are friends, and I see you virtually on an annual basis when you bring your tours into northern BC. But I have a background that the reason that I'm in forestry is because my grandfather was a master carpenter and my dad was in the lumber industry. So it was nearly a given that I would go in the same direction. Did something like that happen to you?
Yes, it was exactly the same. I was growing up, my father was working in forest, my grandfather, my uncle, growing up with hunting and fishing, and we had a little small forestry land, family forest land, 8 hectares in the family. So the goal for me was also to educate in forestry, but an accident when we were hunting led me into ambulance service for some years before I started to educate in forestry and educate to biology, to be a biologist as well. I have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees.
And the one was in forestry and the other was in
Biology.
In biology. And
Yeah.
and so you studied at the university, was it in Stockholm or?
The forestry was in a town called Skinnskatteberg, the Swedish Agriculture University, and it's west of Stockholm. And I have been a couple of years up in Umeå, up in northern part of Sweden. And that was
So you,
Umeå University.
Right. In your training, how many years would that have taken you to do those degrees?
A little more than 5 years in total at university.
Right. In the Bachelor of Science, would that deal a lot with landscape planning and working forest base?
Yes, I think many of in Sweden, the Swedish name for this bachelor degrees I went to is called Forest Master. So it's very useful. It could be that you're a leader of a company, or you can work out in the field with planning, with forestry plans, or you can work with logistics. You can work in a bank with forest economy, giving advice to many forest owners. A big difference in Sweden compared with BC and Canada is that 50% of the forest land is owned by small family forest owners. So
yeah, so which is uniquely different, right? Is the you say 50% are small timber licenses, are not licenses, it's really owned, it's private.
Yeah. The average size is 50 hectare or 125 acres. It's smaller in south and bigger in north.
And that applies to 50% of the working forest land base, really. That's a lot of licenses or a lot of ownership. And then the other half, where would the ownership lie for that?
The other half is half of that, so 25% in total is owned by companies, bigger companies. And the other 25, the last 25% is owned by the state and other public, the church, municipalities, and some other public ownership. So that's an interesting balance that we don't see in so many other countries when we are traveling around in the world. We have been to 27 countries on study trips. So
if you really look at BC, and now when I see here, 100% is owned by either companies, churches, or small owners, and then companies. That in BC, 97% is crown timber. If I look at British Columbia, and 3% is about what is owned privately.
Yeah.
Now, as a result of all of that, the other thing I quickly want to touch on for our public is, and we have to, there are so many things that we can talk about, so that this interview will be one, but I'm absolutely convinced we're going to do more, and we already talked about that earlier. In the next 3-4 weeks, do another one. But just touching on some other ones here is that if you look at the makeup of the timber that is being harvested, the similarities between BC, right? What are the dominant species in Sweden?
The dominant species is Norwegian spruce, Pisia abies, and that's 41% of the forest land. And then we have Scotch pine. It's 40% of the land.
About similar to Lodgepole Pine, Jan?
Yeah, it's quite similar, yes. And the Norwegian spruce is very closely related to white spruce.
Right.
And your Engelmann spruce also.
And the remainder?
The remainder is birch, 13%. And that makes up 94. So that's another 6%. That's oak in southern part of Sweden. It's beech. And then we have 2.5-3% with lodgepole pine that we have been imported from you, and especially from BC, Washington, Yukon. We started in the 1920s to plant lodgepole pine, and in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it was huge plantation with lodgepole pine.
So the seedlings for that really came from Canada or BC.
Yeah, the main is coming from BC.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Now, the other thing is that, that in BC, we going through a transition, have gone through a transition several times, but this one in particular is structural, where our annual allowable cut has been substantially reduced through fires and beetle kill. And I know there were some issues around that in Sweden, but some of the things I just wanted to kind of share quickly with, and you and me are familiar with the numbers, but for those people that are watching, is that the commercial forest land base of Sweden and BC are very similar. Where BC is about 22 million hectares, Sweden is 335 million hectares. The total volume of logged from that land base currently or approximately is around 60 million cubic meters annually in BC, which is now being reduced to closer to around 45 million in the interior. And then, but in Sweden, you are as high from the same land base as 80 to 90 million cubic meters annually. And it has been fairly consistent at that level.
Yes, that's correct. Because of this long tradition and history we have been using the land very intense, and so we have an intense forestry, and the last at least 30-40 years it has been on the level 70 to 90, and we were up to 100 million 15 years ago when we had a big blowdown and big windfall, and the annual growth is more, so we are adding volume to our accounts. And from 1923, when we started with the national taxation, we can see that it's like 3 times more than we had 1920s.
Yeah. So the interesting part about all of this is that BC is going through today, looking at how we are reducing the amount of annual allowable cut, which has resulted in sawmills not curtailing but shutting down. Is that we have too much capacity and not enough timber, available for manufacturing because of pine beetle and fires, where we are now, as I said earlier, closer to 45 million cubic meters annually. The other thing I believe are distinctly different things that we should take notice of from BC looking at Sweden is that which are the areas that made them so much more effective. And I believe that, the other thing, the intense forestry that is on the land base, or the forest land base, where thinning is a normal practice that happens 2 or 3 times before reaching maturity?
Yes. We used to say that usually should do 2 pre-commercial thinnings first, and then go into 2 to 3 thinnings, commercial thinnings on the rotation time. And the rotation time have been between 80 to 120 years, south 70, 80 years, and north 100 to 120 years. So it's very intense. Every 15, 20 years we go in and do some kind of management. But when you own your land and you have it for many generations, some of the people that travel with me and then have been visiting and meeting you, John, they have farms that have been in their generation, in their family for 11 generations, 12 generations. So it's a long-term management
and that likely is some of the critical elements that we must examine in British Columbia as we look at how do we generate more fiber per hectare. Is that the system it is now is that we have volume-based tenures that that are not identified by particular areas. It should be, if nothing else, an area-based tenure system that the stewards have mutual benefit of increasing the yield per hectare. So that's one of the parts that we must address in British Columbia, I believe.
This is interesting, and I think in a global perspective, you have big possibilities with so much land. I think the forest land in the whole Canada, it's like 14, 16 times more. If we take the whole Canada, Sweden is 22 Sweden to be Canada. So that says something. And British Columbia is 2.1 Sweden. So
exactly.
You have huge areas of forest land that you can bring with more intense management. You can get more fiber.
Another thing that I wanted to, and we got so many things to talk about. The other thing that I quickly wanted to mention is that the direct forest employment, Sweden versus British Columbia, from that particular land base is at least nearly double the labor input on the same volume of timber harvested. And, the other thing that happened in Sweden, if I kind of look back in the last 20, 30 years, and that's another part of our industry, is that we are commodity manufacturers of lumber, producing same products going virtually into the same marketplace, is that 20, 30 years ago, something happened in Sweden that forced them into a different direction in terms of the marketplace they were selling to was no longer serving their purpose, and they had to start look for new opportunities. And they shifted from Europe to, I believe, initially Japan, which changed the manufacturing of the industry. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it's different steps in our development, and my experience, I think it because of the mechanization in the 80s with harvesters and forwarders, we came into some economical problems around 1990s, and we realized that with less people in the forestry, we have to do something to get people employed and to get more value added to the logs and the trees. So we started to build up more sawmilling. So from 1990 to today, I think it's nearly double or 80% more lumber coming out from our sawmills. And we also do more glulam. We do CLT, cross-laminated timber is very popular now. And in the 90s, we started to go outside Europe. We came to Japan, was the first country that started to get big, and then other countries have been important. North Africa, even US has been some export.
So looking forward, Jan, if I look at us, in particular in British Columbia, where we are in transition and looking at on a daily basis, talk about losing manufacturing capacity because we don't have enough timber, that are an immense hardship on communities, and makes us then collectively wonder, at the public in general, is there a future in the forest industry? There is, in my mind, no question about that. We have probably, next to Sweden or together with Sweden, the best growing area, for growing the fiber that we grow here, similar as the Sweden does, and that there are a couple of things absolutely, totally clear. The future, it's not for us at NBC a question of reinventing the wheel. We just simply have to look at starting with, how do we grow the fiber? How do we create more fiber per hectare? And the answer is simple. We have to do more intensive forestry, not unsimilar to Sweden. In terms of the manufacturing, we have to do the same. We have to look at the manufacturing and add more value to our product and finding new products for new markets. One of the challenges, just quickly wanted to still share with you, is that we have to find a skilled workforce for new practices of manufacturing of products and new equipment that will be used in the manufacturing, and we do not have that. We have to spend more on investing in infrastructure to develop those skill sets. Do you have the similar challenges?
Yes, I think it's about the same, but because we have a smaller area of land, it's smaller scale, but we like logs, it's nearly no exports. All that we cut is adding some value on it, as lumber or glue lamb or different paper products. So the development has been tough, and we have done a lot of investments the last year. The big companies, SCA, Stora Enso, they are putting a lot of money into this to develop new products, batteries made of paper and so on, bottles of tree wood fiber.
Right. And so looking for new products and for new markets. The other part I quickly wanted to talk to you about is that, we have some very major companies here in British Columbia. One of the largest one is Canfor. And then we have some other ones, West Fraser and some other major ones. Now, Canfor made a fairly major move the last year or two into the Swedish market by acquiring Vida.
Yeah.
What happened? How did the Swedes feel about that?
I think most of the Swedish people connected to forestry, they were surprised that, Canada is buying companies here in Sweden. And Vida was are a very well-known company. It's a family company and very well run, with good reputation in southern part of Sweden. And that was surprising. And Canfor is also, we know, many of us know Canfor, so that was interesting to see what will come out of this. And the last years we have also had more problem with mountain pine beetle or spruce beetle that we have on our spruce. So we have similar problems as you have had. So your experience from BC is probably interesting for Vida sawmills here also.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, because you have such a unique background in having studied so extensively in science and forestry, is that, do you think, which I, in my own little world, and a lot of other people think, that global warming has definitely something to do with a lot of this in terms of pine beetle possibilities and all of that?
Yes, I think it has to do with that. And the last 2-3 years we have been visiting you in Canada, US, up in Alaska. We have seen different beetle kills. We have seen glaciers that are melting in Nepal. We have been in New Zealand and problems there, and Portugal with a lot of fires. And we have had bigger fires in Sweden than we have had for over 100 years. But it's still very small compared with Canada and BC.
Right. Now quickly, because we are ending our interview here shortly, is that I have to share with our public that we have known each other for 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and that you have a company that is a traveling company that takes Swedish landowners and other people interested in the forest industry and tours them into different parts of the world. And one of the areas you come to is into northern British Columbia, and you've come to visit Prince George. Probably already for 6, 7 years. This year will not be one of them because of COVID-19, but hopefully in 21 again. But, just tell us just a little bit about your tours that you do, and particularly as they relate to BC and northern BC.
Yes, the history that I started with these study tours for forest owners and people working in forestry 19 years ago. We did the first tour to Russia, and then we came to US next year 2002, and since then we have made over 100 study trips, and Canada is one of my favorites, and we talked about this before, John, that the Swedish soul and the soul of Canadian people is very close. We are like brothers or sisters, and it's 10 years ago I met you first time, and so I've been in up to Prince George and BC on tours for 10 years.
And they enjoy coming to visit us here?
Yes, they enjoy, and of course many people want to come back, and I have had people that have been with me with more than 10 tours, but many lift up Canada and New Zealand. That's the two favorites for many people.
Jan, it was a pleasure and a privilege all the way from Sweden. Thank you for being part of my interview. As we already talked before, you will be back at some point, and hopefully in the next month or so, because there is so much more to discuss, and it's so important for us here in BC to have somebody with the expertise of you to be part of us. And thank you very much for being part of my show today.
Thank you, John, and thank you for being a part of this and possibility to meet on this way instead of visiting you. We are missing you this year, but hope to be back next year.
Thanks, Jan.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching us today, and we'll see you the next time.